All right. Before I could explain the intangibles of wildness, before I knew how to defend wild spaces, I wanted to buy a 2015 Subaru Crosstrek, a tangerine one, sleek interior, high clearance. That's when I had an idea. Instead of financing that first car, I would use those earmarked dollars to fund a nearly 7,000-mile wilderness adventure, a 13-month thru hike that would ignite the torch of preservation within me. But first, it all started right here. I was an admissions counselor at the University of Rochester. I'm an alum. Woo! And while I was reading the application essays of high school seniors who are eager to challenge the status quo, I started to become more motivated to pursue my own passions. It's possible that someone sitting in the audience right now wrote the essay that inspired this trip. So thank you. I was met by family and fellow alums along the thru-hike journey. They greeted me with food, boosted my morale. So look around you. It's possible that someone in this audience will provide you with trail magic someday. I started with the Pacific Crest Trail, 2,650 miles, traversing 47 wilderness areas, 7 national parks, all the way from Canada, winding its way down to Mexico. It was like stumbling into a Dr. Seuss book. Wilderness challenges mentally, physically, emotionally, sometimes all at once. And when something challenges you, it begins to change you. People always ask me, Tyler, what was one of your favorite memories along the Pacific Crest Trail? This moment of a sunset behind Mount Rainier ranks highly. It was like a Crayola crayon canvas of color. And it was here that I decided to pursue the challenge of wilderness. I thought if I could walk through the night, I would make it to the heart of the Goat Rocks Wilderness by sunrise. Clambering over arêtes and snowfields, I made it. I saw elk in the valley below, Mount Rainier to the north, the second tallest stratovolcano in Washington, Mount Adams to the southeast, and looming in the distance, I could see Mount St. Helens with the top third of its summit blown to smithereens. It was a euphoric experience. I was enraptured by wildness, and it brought me to tears. Wilderness areas clean water, filter air, and provide a home for wildlife to raise their young in a secure habitat. But what else encapsulates the spirit of wildness, and how can it benefit our society to protect more land? Preserved within these wilderness areas is the increasingly rare opportunity to experience the intangibles of wildness: silence, solitude, remoteness. These are places where people can experience psychologically restorative havens. They're becoming increasingly rare to find. I made it to Oregon. And while on the slopes of Mount Hood at Timberline Lodge, I met the thru-hiker legend, Billy Goat. And I asked him a similar question. I said, Billy Goat, what's one of the greatest experiences you've ever had on trail? And the lights dimmed as this sunburnt and sinewy man recounted, so there I was, in the Great Basin of Wyoming, when suddenly, out in the fields in front of me, I saw not one, but 200 wild horses galloping in the fields below. One of them trotted right up to me, flipped his mane right at me. And do you want to know what that horse said? Not in English, mind you. That horse said to me, come on, come play with me. And do you want to know what I said back? And I literally had chocolate chip pancakes dripping out of my mouth as he was saying this story. I replied to that horse in English, mind you. I said to that horse, I would, but I can't run that fast. Billy Goat was humble enough to give those animals the space they needed to live out a free-willed existence. Billy Goat helped to preserve the wild mystery of that magical place. I made it to California, and eclipsing 10,000 feet atop Sonora Pass, I was about to enter the longest roadless stretch remaining in the United States, the lower 48. I felt like an ant at the base of a chalice as I walked through the valleys of Yosemite, Kings Canyon, Sequoia National Parks. My trail family, dubbed the Wrong Way Gang because we were going in the less frequently used southbound version of the trail. We made it atop Mount Whitney, highest point in the contiguous 48 states. We waited for the sun to rise, and when it crested the horizon, we sang in unison, "Oh, say, can you see?" Hiking the Pacific Crest Trail, I never felt more alive, and I would argue I never felt more American. And with that newfound patriotism, I went right out of the country and straight to New Zealand to tramp Te Araroa, the long pathway, 3,007 kilometers, winding its way from Cape Ringa at the tip of the North Island all the way down to the bottom of the South Island at Bluff. This time, felt like I had stumbled into Middle Earth. The best part about Te Araroa is that it's an international trail, and Rochester knows it's important to have an immersion experience where you surround yourself with people from different countries, from different backgrounds, with different ideas and different beliefs. Those people will challenge you to become the best possible version of yourself, even if you don't recognize it at the time. While I was on that 7-day paddle down the Wanganui River to get back to the Tasman Sea, we pulled our canoes ashore to visit a marae, a Maori community center. Pituari was our host. He performed the intimidating haka. He greeted us with a hangi, and he went into his ancestral talk. Kauri trees, New Zealand's old-growth kauri trees. They once touched the sky. And then the Europeans came, and they cut down our kauri trees to build the great cities of Auckland, Christchurch, Dunedin. But my ancestors, the 101 non-sellers, decided not to bargain away this natural landscape that you see here. Those trees made my ancestors a promise. If you don't cut us down, we will never cut you down. Pituari taught me planetary modesty. And while I stood on a glacial moraine in Nelson Lakes National Park, I realized that vast tracts of protected lands don't just miraculously happen. It takes the passionate conviction of people like Pituari's ancestors, people like you, to protect land. The last leg of my journey was on the heralded Appalachian Trail, 2,189 miles, going from Springer Mountain in Georgia all the way to Katahdin, the highest point in Maine. The plaque reads, "A footpath for those who seek fellowship with the wilderness." Along the Appalachian Trail, you cross the Southern Balds, you see feral ponies and Grayson Highlands. But as you enter the mid-Atlantic, road crossings become more numerous, and the spirit of wildness begins to fade. And then you enter New Jersey. You hear birds chirping. You see birds of prey soaring over the Delaware River. Porcupines amble across your path, black bears too. And as you progress into the northeast, you go through a wild patchwork of motor-free lands that heighten your experience. On top of Mount Greylock in Massachusetts, I heard the familiar call of a white-throated sparrow. And after nearly a year away, I felt like I just walked home. I felt like I embraced a fair share of wildness on this trip. So when I reached Katahdin, I had to ask myself a few questions. How have I changed? How can I articulate the values of wildness to others? And what color was that Subaru I was going to get again? When I finished the Appalachian Trail, I got a call from the Adirondack Mountain Club. They said, "Well, apparently you really like to hike." They brought me on board as an outdoor educator. And along with my colleagues, we execute this wonderful program called the 3 Seasons at Heart Lake, where we bring every year over 400 fourth graders from 10 local elementary schools to develop a connection with a place. And when you begin to understand a wild space, no matter its size, you can begin to value it, maybe even begin to love it. Education's a great place to start, so I turned to Wilderness Connect to learn a little bit more about wildness. If you total together wilderness areas, both state and federal, you learn a startling statistic. Less than 3% of the contiguous lower 48 states is protected and designated as motor-free wilderness. If you combine those remaining wilderness areas together, they would easily fit inside of the state of Minnesota. Oofda. There are over 4.1 million miles of roads crisscrossing the United States. Hey, roads are important. They got us all here today. But should motors have the right to go everywhere? Think of your favorite wild space. Imagine that place changing, imperceptibly at first, but with the addition of every road and every habitat fragmented, are you comfortable with your favorite space losing its intangibles of wildness? My favorite place is the Boreas Ponds Tract in the Adirondack Mountains of upstate New York. It's the largest high-elevation wetland complex. It's the size of Manhattan, but unlike Manhattan, currently motor-free. A plan is in place to motorize one of the last vestiges of wildness, the Boreas Ponds Tract, in the entire Northeast. The areas in red are our remaining quiet spaces in the Adirondack Park, totaling less than 5% of the landscape. And when no one else stood up to defend remote backcountry, a new group formed called the Adirondack Wilderness Advocates to rock the boat. I joined them immediately to ensure that the torch of preservation would not extinguish there. Adirondack Wilderness Advocates gathered letters from across the country, all 50 states, asking for a full motor-free wilderness area to protect that wetland landscape. They also advocated for equestrian use with lift assistance wagons so that all people, regardless of their ability, could have the same motor-free experience of silence, solitude, and remoteness. All biotic beings on this planet deserve to have a motor-free experience. Dr. Seuss once wrote, "Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better." It's not. So I decided to use my skill set as a thru-hiker to defend one of the last remaining quiet places left in New York State. We gathered new petitions, filled my backpack, and I walked through the Boreas Ponds Tract, over the highest mountains in New York, to the mighty source of the Hudson River. Darkness fell. My back ached. My legs quaked. And as I pressed into the night, a sheet of ice broke free from a rock precipice and smashed on the trail in front of me. All of a sudden, I was overwhelmed. Why aren't the state agencies protecting the wildness here? Why have other groups turned their backs on wildness at Boreas Ponds? Something happened that I didn't expect. When I made it out of the wilderness, I was greeted by other wilderness advocates who cared about the intangibles of wildness. They relieved me of that heavy backpack. They helped carry it all the way 6 miles to the Adirondack Park Agency, who would decide its fate. These are the real heroes who are making waves to preserve the spirit of wildness. But we weren't alone on that 47-mile hike, because as the agency opened their meeting, we walked up to the podium. We lifted that torch of preservation, and it was the collective impact of 1,882 people who asked for a full wilderness classification that helped us carry that torch all the way from Boreas Ponds. Our remaining wild spaces need more passionate wilderness advocates. If not you, who? And if not for you, for the wildlife that calls those places home, and for the unborn generations who will inherit this earth. All you have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to you. Now that's not my line, that's Gandalf's. And it inspired Frodo to go on the most epic thru-hike of all. No matter what your passions are, No matter where your personal journey takes you, whether it be to fight for social justice, increase access to higher education, or to preserve wilderness. You can't just wish for things to get better. People who grasp at wishes grab nothing but air. You have to decide to do something tangible. Collect petitions, grab a pen, grab a microphone, start a rally. You can do something tangible to inspire the most important intangible quality of all. Hope. The torch is yours. Thank you, Rochester. Keep it wild.
Thank you.